All right, so in this video, I'm gonna tell you where to look for answers to your oil painting questions by critiquing a bunch of my students' paintings. All right, welcome to Paint Coach. My name's Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify oil painting so that you can get better faster. So I once heard a very good painter say, you can't really teach painting, you can only tell people where to look for answers. And the more I paint and the more I teach, the more I kind of find that to be true in a way. You know, painting's not like cooking. Like I can't just give you a recipe and as long as you follow the steps, you're gonna get exactly what you wanted. As Richard Schmid said in his book, learning painting is like learning a language. And it takes practice to hone the skills and be able to say what you wanna say and do what you wanna do with your work. And when I first started oil painting, I felt like I'd always kind of deviate and go off on certain tangents with my learning that didn't really result in much. Like I didn't know where to look for answers. Like I'd go off and try this thing and try that thing and be like, well, I feel like I didn't learn much there. And as time went on, I kept finding that every single one of my problems or any issue that I ran into with my painting could be resorted back to the painting fundamentals. Things like color, value, drawing, simplification, form, edges, composition. You know, you might think that your problem is like more specific to a certain subject matter or something, but I can pretty much guarantee you that the root problem is in one of these fundamentals. So I've made a video like this before. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a link to it above right now. But I did the same process. I went into the private Facebook group for people signed up to my Patreon and I asked them to submit paintings that they've done from my tutorials that they would like to get a critique on. I got so many paintings submitted and I wish I could have gotten to all of them. And again, there were some paintings that I was like, I don't have much to say. This looks really good. Let's jump on in and talk about color. All right, so I have this painting here. I got the students over here and mine over here. And this is actually a master copy from a Edgar Payne painting. And the painting's really good. It's a really good painting. You know, I like the values, the drawing, everything is really working. And I'm kind of nitpicking here, but I kind of wish they would have pushed more yellow into the sky, you know, because that's going to have an effect on everything else. Because when you put that yellow in the sky and you're gonna have to compare it to the sail, you're gonna have to also make the sail more yellow to stand out from the sky behind it. Because like right now, the sky's very blue. So they didn't have to push the yellow that much in the sail to get that separation. But when you push the yellow in the sky, it's gonna cause you to have to make adjustments and make the sails more yellow. And I think it's important for this painting in particular because a big aspect of this is just this, you know, direct sunlight and feeling that warmth. And I feel like it also comes into play with the ocean as well. Like I feel like they could have pushed a little more warm color in the ocean, adding like maybe a little more red to parts of this ocean to make it a little more purple. So always be comparing your colors. It's about color relationships. And with this painting in particular, I remember when I was doing it, I had to go back and like I kept adjusting the sky and I'd put in another element of the painting, like I'd put in the sails or the boat or the ocean or something, and I'd have to go back and adjust my sky, and when I adjusted my sky, I'd have to go back and adjust something else. But that's the process of getting the color relationships right. It's like having a bunch of different dials and you have to keep changing one and dialing in the other and dialing in the other and comparing them. Now, a very common thing that I see happen with students in color is they add too much white to their paint. Whenever they need to lighten something, they just immediately go to white. And sometimes white is the answer, but a lot of times you just need to mix a lighter value in it. Take this one for instance. I got the students over here. And the main thing I'm looking at is this light area in the grass. And I can tell they put a lot more white into it than they needed, and it's kind of coming off as chalky. You can see if I take some of the green that I used, just how much more, you know, vibrancy color is in there, because I used more yellow to lighten up the green. And you can see how just having that in is gonna have a big effect on how you view all the colors in the painting. Now, one more thing to talk about with color is atmospheric perspective, which is as things get further away from you, certain colors drop out, first yellows, then reds, and you're left with blues. If you want a whole video on atmospheric perspective, I have made one. I'll put a link to it above right now. So we got the students painting over here, and the main thing that's drawing my attention is the saturation of greens and these bushes back here. And with atmospheric perspective, as things get further away from you, the saturation of color is gonna get less and less. If I take some of the green from mine, put it in here, you can just see how less vibrant it is. A little more there. It's, it's a very neutralized green, and that's gonna help set it further in the distance, because right now this really bright green, it's competing with these things here in the foreground. So if you're painting a landscape that has a lot of depth to it, like a lot of different levels, a helpful thing to do is start with the furthest element in the scene, which a lot of times is the sky, and then work your way forward. That's what I did here. I started with the sky, went to the ocean, went down to this beach, then I moved to these cliffs, and while I was working these bushes, I knew I had to save some saturation and some yellow and reds for the greens that I put up front. If I had made these bushes too vibrant, too green, too much yellow, it'd leave me nowhere to go for any of the grasses or anything that I put in the foreground. Now, if you struggle with color mixing, I actually offered the color mixing video from my Foundations of Oil Painting course for free. I'll put a link to where you can get that in the description below. All right, now let's talk about the next fundamental, which is value. And value is how light or dark a color is. And honestly, most of the time when people think they have a color problem, it's actually a value problem. All right, so we have this still life painting here. It's actually from my Foundations of Drawing course. And I'm actually going to put the photo into black and white because this is gonna help us see value, just light and dark. And the main thing I wanna focus in on are these flowers. And the biggest problem I see people have with flowers in particular is they don't get the darks dark enough. You can see, I have a lot of good dark shapes within these flowers. If I put some of these dark values over here in these flowers, it's going to give them more depth and just more form and make them read a lot better. I remember when I was painting this, it was really important to establish the darks in the flowers beforehand. And I actually like to err on the side of, maybe putting in too many darks, because it can always, lighten things up. It's a lot easier to lighten paint as you go opposed to darkening it. And just getting those dark shapes in there are gonna make the lighter shapes that come later work really well. I've talked about this a lot, but value is how we portray form. And down here with these apples, you can see that there could be a lot more darker values within these apples to give them form, and also lighter values. These apples have a really bright highlight. Putting that in is gonna add a lot. All right, staying on values, let's go to a portrait. I got this one of Walter White, and you can probably just tell before I even put it into black and white, how much darker they could have gone in these shadow areas. Got it in black and white here. I'm just gonna take some of my shadow color here, and you can see, working this in, there was a lot more room they could have gone in terms of darkness. And so once you get those darkest darks in, it's gonna help you see all the other values a lot better. And you're gonna see that, areas like up here, you could push the darks a little more. And when you push the darks more, it's gonna make this highlight seem a lot brighter. Another important aspect are value transitions. And you're gonna create these transitions by adding more value shapes. Just look at the nose here and how many more value shapes I have in my nose than they do. And they pretty much just have two values. They have this dark and then this light value. Whereas over here, I got a darker value there, and then the nose is another value, and then I have little lighter values there. And having more of those value shapes is gonna help you create more form. Speaking of form, let's talk about form next. So here we got a still life painting. I feel like they could have gotten a lot more form out of the flowers up here. I can see they are communicating a shadowed side of the flower and then a light side, but I feel like they could have pushed the light side a little bit more. You can see here, just by getting rid of some of the darks in the light side and some of the lights in the dark side and making it more clear, the light and shadowed side, it's giving more form to those flowers. When I was painting these flowers, I first identified the light side and the shadowed side and wasn't even concerned about communicating petals. I was just trying to think of them like just big masses. And as the painting progressed, I added smaller shapes and put in a few individual petals here or there and cut back into the flowers to get these big masses to read like flowers and petals. Here's another example of a really good painting that I feel like they could have pushed the form a little bit more. Coming back to values, I feel like they could have pulled more values out of this area in the cow. You can see, you know, they got kind of like one value here, then this is a little lighter, and then the lightest value there. There's just not many value shapes. Whereas look at how many value shapes I have here and how dark I kept it. You know, there's just so many smaller little shapes and value transitions throughout this part. When I put it in black and white here, you can see how many more smaller value shapes I have working in mind. And again, the more value shapes you have, the more form you're gonna be able to communicate. When I was doing this painting, I started out very big, very broad with my shapes and my values. And as the painting progressed, I'd find smaller and smaller shapes to create more form. I always say work big to small. Start with the big masses, the big value shapes. Figure out those and then find these subtle transitions within those big value shapes. I feel like they have a really good start here, and I'd like to see them keep going and keep pushing and seeing how many more, you know, value shapes and value transitions they can find. All right, now let's talk about drawing. I have this example of a street scene, and I know cars are very hard to paint. I remember one time when I met a painter I really admired, and she had just some of the best cityscapes I'd ever seen, and she painted cars so perfect yet so simply. And I asked her, I was like, how do you paint cars on the side of the street just so good? Like, what's the trick? Like, what should I do to paint better cars? And she said, drawing. It's all about drawing. And as time went on, I came to find that very true. I mean, you can see here that they have put more detail into their cars than I have mine, but they haven't figured out the big simple value shapes of the car. You know, taking a look just at, you know, this car right here, it's painted very simply, but the angles and the perspective are right enough to communicate the car and where it's sitting. Same with this car over here, and just the perspective of, you know, where that wheel is opposed to that wheel. You know, the angle of the roof here, the angle of the highlights. It's the proper perspective for the car. I actually broke down painting this whole scene in another video, and I talk about how I simplify painting cars. If you want to check out that video, I'll put a link to it above right now. Now, I actually want to stay on this painting as we move on to the next topic, which is simplification. I feel they would have had an easier time painting the cars if they were able to simplify it down to its basic shapes. You know, if you take a look at this car here, it's comprised of a few shapes. We have, you know, the shadow underneath the car, also incorporating the wheels, so we get that shape right. And then there's just, you know, the overall, you know, shape of the car, which is kind of like this one gray value. And then there's the shape of the grille, the window, and then, you know, a highlight. If you can get those simple shapes right, you don't need to go into much detail. You just look at, you know, these cars over here, like super simple, but, you know, I got this back window, a little bit of a tail light, shadow and wheels under the car, and it's enough to read as a car in the distance. All right, coming back to these blue flowers with another example. I think they might have gotten a little too carried away with the flowers here and just putting in too many values, too many shapes, too many colors. And I feel like it kind of lost the form of it a little bit, especially with, you know, some like these lighter values in the shadowed side. A lot of times less is more. And you can see here on mine, I got way less going on, but I feel like more form being communicated just because I have a pretty distinct shadowed side to these flowers and a pretty distinct light side. And when I established that at the beginning, a big part of what I'm doing throughout the painting is like trying not to lose that. I'm always trying to think of like, all right, how much more can I add before things get too chaotic and I kind of lose the structure that I built. All right, now let's move on to edges. I got another example from this blue flower still life. This one was really popular. They got a really good painting going here. The one thing I would like to see is to soften and break up this hard, crisp edge here. I feel like if they would have let a little bit of the blue flower paint blend into the background, maybe cut back in with a few more shapes, I feel like it would have helped the petals read more. Like right now, it just seems like a little too much like a cutout or something. You know, the form of the flowers are there. Like so much of this painting's, you know, looking really great. It's just that's like the one thing that I would want to see is soften and break up this edge a little bit. Another example of edges coming into play here is the white water in this beach painting. And in the edge of it, it's just a little too sharp and crisp, and it's not helping portray that kind of mist form of this white water. You can see in mine here, I let the white blend into the paint that's around it, and you get some softer edges. See it happening here, down here, just kind of letting it blend in. I mean, there are some crisp edges here and there, but having softer edges is just gonna help better portray that texture of what you're painting. You know, you're contrasting it with the rock, you know, this is a very harsh edge. Harsh edges all the way around that because it's a rock. So in your painting, if you got some things with hard edges, some with soft edges, it's gonna make things more dynamic and more interesting. Next thing I wanna talk about is composition. And I actually wanna use a still life painting as an example for composition, just to show you, even with a still life painting, composition is still important. And you see I did mine on a square composition, whereas they put theirs on a rectangle, and it's created, you know, a lot bigger empty spaces, which isn't helping the composition. You know, they're really well painted apples. Like, I really like how they painted the apples, got a lot of form. I like the brush work. I just feel like the composition is creating a lot of this kind of like dead space. Now, come back to the agri paint boats. It seems like a little thing I'm gonna point out here, but this little point, it's just too close to the edge. Whenever you have corners of something, you don't want that going right up to the edge of the painting or meeting perfectly with like another edge or corner. It's just gonna draw your eye to it. Like you see here, I have mine just going off of the edge of the canvas. So that's a compositional thing to be aware of. So the last thing you want to do is paint a really good painting with great colors, values drawn and everything, but the composition is causing people to focus on something that isn't supposed to be the main focus of the painting. Another composition example is this barn one here. And I wanted this painting to be mainly about the trees, which is why you can see the trees take up a majority of the space in this painting, you know, compared to the ground and the sky. Whereas here, they brought the ground up so much that it's competing as the same size in a lot of ways as the trees. One, it's making the trees less important, but two, whenever you have similar size shapes, like the width of these two areas are similar, it's gonna make the scene less dynamic. You know, you either want to bring the ground up like really high, like maybe all the way up here, and then maybe the barn was up there, and then you make it about the path that led to the barn, and it's more focused on, you know, the grass and what's happening there. Or you do the opposite and you bring the grass down a little bit more. That way you can emphasize and have a bigger space for the trees. All right, I hope you enjoyed this critique session. You can learn so much from looking at other people's work and being able to find the same problems in your work so that you can fix them. If you want to try out the tutorials of any of these paintings, they're all on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description below. And if you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.